This video is brought to you by the Deck of Many and their animated spell cards, on sale now at animatedspells.com. Hello and welcome to the Gallant Goblin. Today's video is a little bit different. Earlier in the year, I sat down for an interview with Mr. Stephen Glicker, the extremely knowledgeable and talented game master from the Roll for Combat podcast. We were mainly going to talk about the Pathfinder Agents of Edgewatch adventure path, but we ended up talking about quite a lot of other topics as well. Once we wrapped things up, I was waiting to get my hands on the last book of the adventure path before we edited and released the video, so that took a little bit of time, and then I got sick, and then A Song for the Shadows took over our lives, and then we got inundated with a lot of new releases, and so long story short, this interview has been sitting on the back burner for about 6 months now. So my apologies to Stephen for taking so long to release it, but this ends up being a good time for it, because Stephen's RPG Superstar book, the Battlezoo Bestiary, is on Kickstarter right now. Use the link in the doohickey down below to check it out. This book adds a huge variety of fully fleshed out and fully illustrated creatures to your Pathfinder and 5e campaigns. That's right. Everything in the campaign and all these books is for both Pathfinder 2nd edition and D&D 5th edition. We'll talk more about the book during the interview, including the so-called secret chapter. Well, some time has passed now, and I can tell you what that is. Stephen worked together with the Paizo developers to create the Monster Parts system, which will allow you to take the remains of any monster and turn them into weapons, armor, shields, skill items, and many other things. It's a massive system that can completely change up your games, and it'll be available in the Battlezoo Bestiary. Plus, there are 2 other books in the Kickstarter project: the Dragon Ancestry book by Paizo's own design lead that lets you play as an actual dragon in your campaigns, and a full adventure path that utilizes the Bestiary, the Monster Part system, and the Dragon Ancestry or race, Jewel of the Indigo Isles, by some of the most talented RPG writers out there. You can see more about the whole Kickstarter using that link in the eye in the corner of your screen up there to see our full preview. As for the Agents of Edgewatch, this is a full Pathfinder adventure path where the party plays City Watch agents in the vast city of Absalom. You start out as beat cops covering the Radiant Festival, a once-in-a-century World's Fair, which brings folks in from around the world, including grifters, charlatans, and others who may have more malevolent ambitions. The Agents of Edgewatch eventually uncover a plot that threatens the entire city, and it takes them to some pretty dark places. This is a unique adventure in a number of different ways. As City Watch agents, your party should be lawful good characters, or at least close to that. It also casts the usual process of taking loot off the bodies of your victims in a not-so-favorable light. In fact, in this adventure, you should be dealing non-lethal damage most of the time. So it can be a tricky adventure to GM, as it turns a lot of those usual TTRPG tropes on their heads. Luckily, Stephen has some fantastic suggestions for you if you do want to run Agents of Edgewatch for your group. As of today, he is partway through book 2 of the adventure on his podcast, so without further ado, let's welcome Stephen to the show. Mr. Glicker, it's so good to see you today.
Yes, it's nice to see you too. No one ever calls me Mr. Glicker. That's so formal. You can call me Stephen.
I'm from southern Georgia, and where I grew up, we were taught to call everybody Mr. or Mrs. and until we got to know them on a first name basis.
Wow. Well, I'm from New York, and everyone just calls you, hey.
Hey, Steve.
Pretty much.
I'll practice that. How are you doing today?
Fine. Good.
I appreciate you joining me today. I mean, you have been GMing for, what's it, like 40 years now? Not to age you out here or anything.
I know, since 77.
Man, and so you've played a lot of D&D, you've played a lot of Pathfinder, you've played Starfinder, and your latest one that you've started, to my knowledge, is Agents of Edgewatch. What are your just general impressions of it so far?
So the main reason we did Agents of Edgewatch is because I've done about a third of the adventure paths. I'm a big fan of the adventure path system. I like them a lot. And I've GM'd about a third of the Paizo adventure paths. And one thing that we've noticed is that a lot of them have a pattern. There actually is a pattern. They do, I don't know if you know this, but the way Paizo releases them is that they sort of release one that is kind of a normal adventure path, and then they always release one that's a little out of the box, and they sort of switch off. They do back and forths, and I'm always looking for the out of the box crazy adventure paths, because at this time in our lives we have seen it all, we have done it all, so we gravitate towards adventure paths like Iron Gods, or the Circus Adventure Path, anything that's just different, because just going and doing a dungeon delve is like old hat for us. And when I read this one, this is something we have tried many, many times over the years unsuccessfully, is to run good characters that are not adventurers. Like, in a weird way, the way the adventure path is written, and it's actually very tricky, is that you are guards and that you have to crack down on criminals, and you don't even get loot. Like, the way the loot, like, they didn't even come up. I adjusted the loot system. We kind of did it like a privateer old English loot system, where you get kind of bounties and bonuses. So you get a percentage. I kind of abstracted. So rather than getting loot, I just give them gold. And again, we've tried this many, many, many times over the years, and we've failed a lot of times. So the one thing I noticed is, like, okay, all these times we failed. We tried to do this in Kingmaker, it didn't work. We tried to do it in other adventure paths, didn't work. We're like, okay, we've got like 5 under our belts now. Let's finally do it the right way, and it's working perfectly. And it's with the same people, in fact. So they remember what failed, and it's worked very well. It's not an adventure. Like, it's not like you're not playing PCs. You're playing guards, and you are always on the side of good. You always have to obey the law. And more importantly, you don't get loot in the traditional way. And because of that, it's already very different. And then more importantly, the adventures themselves, I've read thousands of adventures, and not to have not to have hyperbole, this might be the best one I've ever read. And it's mostly because you're doing things that are impossible. Like, you're part of a bank robbery, or stopping bank robberies, or you're investigating, murder scenes, or bringing down, criminal enterprises. I mean, these are just things you just don't do, or you do one aspect. And it's just a breath of fresh air. Like, every time we sit down and play, we regularly are seeing and doing things that have never been done. And this is with over 40 years experience. And all my players have been playing as long as I have. So we have, like, 200 years of experience playing, role-playing games. And none of us have seen any of this ever. So that's why. And as soon as I read it, I was like, we're playing this. I don't care if it's a podcast or not. We're playing this. So that's why we did it, because I knew it would be fun. And also, we're doing it because it's something unique. And I also had a feeling that this wouldn't be run as much, because I think everyone jumped onto the first adventure path. There's a lot of podcasts for the first adventure path. So usually I've seen this happen as the second or the thirds kind of get like skipped a little, because people are already invested. So I don't know anyone else really running this one. I wanted to try it out. But to be honest, I read it. And after I read it, I was like, I'm playing this no matter what. And to be honest, my players were pretty hesitant at first. And we even talked about it. I said, look, we'll play it. We'll give it a couple tries. If you guys don't like it, we'll stop. And these guys, they can't get enough of it. I mean, they love everything about this adventure path. They have never ever seen anything like this, where they're they're literally investigating and solving puzzles, and they're not always fighting. They talk their way out of a lot of things too. And in the past we tried that, and the problem with talking your way out is then they weren't getting loot. So that was actually a big problem in Kingmaker. They had these they had a party that was non-violent, and then the loot would go away, and then they realized, wait, how do you get loot? So there was something that we just experienced with. It's like, okay, if there's non-violent confrontations, I have to make up for it in other ways, which I've done. So again, we've learned a lot over the years, because we've tried to run this adventure type before. And now, it's like all these years, these dozens of years waiting for something like this. I mean, we can't wait every week. They can't wait to play this thing. It's great.
That's awesome. And it comes across in your play when you can hear that everybody's having a good time. And I think one of your players even has a law background, or
Yes,
they were doing
Seth.
the scene. Yes, they were doing the scene where they were talking to some hostage takers, and it was just bringing up like very real world like experience and able to incorporate that, which is probably not something he's used to being able to do in these games.
Now, that's the other funny part is like, well, Seth is the other GM in the group. Like, of all the players in our group, most of them are players, but Seth is a GM and he GMs as much as I do. So it's tricky when you have another GM in the party because he can be as tricky as you can, and he knows he's literally, when you say a rules lawyer, he's literally a rules lawyer. He's a lawyer in real life, and he knows the rules, and he's a genius. So you put all this together, you got to be very, very careful around him. And he and I have played together a long time, and yeah, he was using all of his real world knowledge on law. Luckily, I actually have a huge background in law too, so I was able to keep up with him. So
There you go. That's helpful. And this game you touched on a little bit, but you know that it is a challenge to design an adventure that's really with lawful good characters who are not, you know, killing everyone, stealing their loot, and using that to level up and to get stronger. And you had to go in and make a couple of adjustments yourself to make that work. And so, if we have GMs that are watching this today who maybe don't have as much experience, do you have? Can you share some of the things that you brought to this adventure to help make that work?
yeah, actually, if you listen to the first episode of the podcast, I break it out. I do a couple of things, and a lot of people ask me about this. Actually, I get a lot of questions. I added something called the Lawbreaker badge, and everyone's like, "Was that in the adventure, or did you add that?" I'm like, "I added it," and it was a very simple. It was a very simple way to make everyone behave, and it's basically, it's like a medieval cop camera that,
Mhm.
it's a badge, and it sort of acts as the conscience, and it's kind of in the way of, actually, I had a good excuse too. If you listen to the podcast, I said, well, Absalom was just attacked by um um uh was it the Whispering Tyrant. So they already have a lot of problems, a lot of people are dead, and now they're trying to do this Radiant Festival, and they didn't have time to figure out if all the cops were good or not. So they came up with this badge, which sort of acts as your conscience. And if you don't, behave on your job, the badge will let the superiors know. So this way they can hire people very quickly. And so from a story point of view, it worked out actually very well, because that's something else. My players don't like me putting in things that don't have a story element to it.
Sure.
So that's the first aspect. And the way it works is that it will automatically allow me as the GM to be the conscience and saying, you should do it this way or not do it that way. And if they start getting a little weird, like once Chris was starting to act a little thuggish as a cop, and I warned him, I said, no, 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 the badge doesn't like that. Don't be discriminating or something like that. And he realized, he was a little bit out of bounds, because that's something else for the listeners, is that we realize in this day and age, police officers and cops is a very, very, very touchy subject. And we were very careful. Like, everyone told me I was actually nuts to run this adventure path. They said no one would touch this with a 10-foot pole. And I was thinking about it a lot. I'm like, you know what? If we make sure that everyone upholds the law and there's a reason for it, and my players respect the law as you would want a police officer to act or as a guard to act, I think we'll be okay. And that happened maybe once or twice. And since then, they're totally into the characters. It really didn't take much, like just a very little nudging. And they are playing like the most ideal version of an officer. The other thing I would recommend is, instead of loot, I just convert it to gold. So if you, instead of things dropping, because that's a big problem, is that, okay, you quote killed someone and then you take their loot and then you use it. It's like, how? You're not cops. You shouldn't be doing that. Is that everyone is instead, oh, I forgot about the other big thing, is that the badge also makes all of your spells and attacks non-lethal.
Right.
It just does. Everything's non-lethal. Why? It just does. It's like everything's non-lethal. You don't have to worry about it. It makes things very easy, because then everyone's detained, everyone's arrested, and then you quote get rewards when you turn them in. So if you are supposed to get, let's just say, 60 gold pieces worth of loot, after you arrest them and turn them in, you just get 60 gold pieces. And that's it. And my players actually prefer that. They prefer just to get gold, and then they can spend it on whatever they want. So really those couple of things. It's like having the Lawbreaker badge, which is acting kind of as their conscience. The Lawbreaker badge also will convert all their attacks and spells, all of them, into non-lethal damage automatically. So I don't have to worry about it. There's no penalties. And also converting all loot into just gold. Not all, like every so often, important loot or things that are confiscated from the true bad guys, they can get that, or they can turn it in. And that was kind of all I did. And since then, they've not only gone with it, they love it, because they also feel like they're empowered to be good cops, and then they have the law on their side. And they're even up to a part of the story, which actually the podcast isn't even up to yet, where they're encountering other officers that are not necessarily on the up and up, and they have to confront them. It's very interesting to see we are like the true good officers, and they are disgusted by bad apples in the force. It's really turning into, like, you're thinking about it, it's like, is this an adventure path? Is this like Pathfinder? It's like nothing to do with adventuring, but they're having it's amazing. I've never seen anything like this. And their bosses, they have bosses. That's the other fun thing. They have to report to their bosses. So they're not adventurers. They're like, they find an adventure. They are like the ones that find the stub of the adventure. They bring it back to their officers, and then their superiors give it to adventurers to investigate. So they're like the lead generators. It's really funny. I like it a lot.
It's funny. One of the things I'm really looking forward to in the podcast is right now their boss is, kind of a J. Jonah Jameson type, I think, right? But at some point during the adventure, this is for GM, so this is some spoilers in here. They kind of get promoted above their boss, I believe, in the adventure, and so that relationship is going to switch. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how your players deal with that fella after that happens, when they suddenly have the power over him a little bit.
Well, at that point, they'll be so established, and that they've been playing such good characters that there's no way. But you know what? The boss, it's actually, I think of him not even from Spider-Man. I think of, was it Last Action Hero? If you remember the boss in Last Action Hero, who's always screaming and yelling, that's who I think of when I play him. And because in the Last Action Hero, he was a stereotypical boss from those movies, so he's a stereotype of a stereotype of a stereotype. But the whole joke is he's actually a good guy. That's the thing. He's not a bad guy. He's just a no nonsense. Why are you here? You did your job. Congratulations. I'm paying you for doing what you're supposed to do. Go get, it's like, oh wow, you captured the bad guys. Good job. You did what I told you to do. Go leave. He doesn't give them a lot of accolades, but he's not a bad guy. He's just misunderstood.
One of the things you mentioned at the top of one of your podcasts recently is that the actual tone of this adventure may not be what it originally seems like. The adventure starts with breaking up a dispute between goblin food stand merchants, but it kind of evolves as you get a little further into it, and once the characters and players start putting the pieces together, that not everything they've seen up to now has been completely random. There's been some things going on behind the scenes with some missing persons and whatnot, and then the tone kind of shifts. And you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I actually am very good friends. Patrick Rennie was one of the main developers for this adventure, and he and I talk almost daily because we're working on the project together. And I asked him, I said, "What's going on? I thought this was like a guard cop adventure. It turns into like incredibly hardcore horror, like later, like very hardcore." And he's like, "Yeah, well, cops have to deal with some pretty nasty things." And that's kind of what's his thing. It's like, yeah, it's not. And he also was like, "Oh, do you think we wanted to spoil that?" It gets kind of dark. I don't think it's really a spoiler, but it is. It does. it's weird because they advertise this as, oh, Agents of Edgewatch and your officers. But as I've said, I'm like, that's a small part of this adventure in some ways, because I played Karen Crown, and that one was advertised as the horror adventure. And that was more like classical horror, like Frankenstein and vampires and werewolves and Cthulhu. I mean, that was a great adventure, but it was very based on like 50s classical monsters horror. This is much worse because they have found some of the worst crimes in American history and turned them into the adventure path. So it's horrifying on a multiple aspects because you're like, wow, this adventure is terrifying and horrible and dealing with some really gruesome murders. And then you find out that not only are these like incredibly gruesome crime scenes, these actually happened in real life. And these a lot of these are based on actual murders and crime scenes in America from like the turn of the century. And it's even worse in a lot of ways. But of course, a lot of it is also based on movies. Like, there's a whole Ocean's 11 chapter where they're like, going in and like stopping a bank heist. And then there's also a casino heist. There's all like, you name it. Anything that has been in modern movies is in this. But as I said, the tone shifts all over the place. Even in the podcast to this point, they're breaking up food stand fights, and then they're investigating like a zoo where all the animals get loose.
Right.
And now they're finally up to, I mean, it's like some spoilers, but they're investigating some hardcore murders, and it's way worse than you think. And it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And I actually warn people listening to it, and even our players have a really strong stomachs. Even they're like, damn, this is nasty. This stuff is getting gruesome. And they haven't even got into the really, really horrible parts yet. And I'm not going to spoil it, but the end of like we do it in seasons. And so there's season one, and each season's a book. The end of season one ends in a spectacularly, disgustingly gruesome fashion. That's all I'm going to say.
You're at a point now in the adventure where I never want to stay at a hotel again.
Yes, it's really bad.
And I was going to ask you as well, a lot of the folks who watch our channel here don't have a lot of experience with Pathfinder. We have a lot of D&D players who maybe are new to the hobby, and they look at Pathfinder and it's a little bit intimidating to take on a new rule system. And I was wondering if you could give some advice on making that initial jump into Pathfinder if they're interested. Would Agents of Edgewatch be a good first adventure? I think it's maybe a challenge to go there. Or how would you recommend they get into it? And there's the beginner box that came out as well, which might be a good start.
I mean, it's a tricky adventure. I'll give it to you that. But the thing with Pathfinder is the easiest way to think of D&D 5th edition versus Pathfinder is that D&D 5th edition sort of has the crunch. There's fluff and there's crunch. And so fluff is the like the backgrounds and the world building and the story elements. And the difference between D&D and Pathfinder is sort of, for D&D, at least 5th edition, the fluff is a little bit higher than the crunch. The crunch is like way below, and it's much easier for people to get into the system. The problem with that, at least in my opinion, and trust me, I played 4th edition D&D. I've played a sorcerer from level 1 to level 20. So I've seen it all. And I played a lot of D&D as well. The thing with D&D is like, I feel like after you play it a couple of times, it can get a little repetitive. But with Pathfinder, they sort of have it the other way, is that there's a lot of crunch. And there's just as much fluff, though, because Pathfinder's been around like 12 years now. So the system in the world is gargantuan. So there's just as much. But it's sort of like if you wanted to make a type of character, a very specific type of character that you couldn't make in D&D, you can make it in Pathfinder. And it's very easy to make it in Pathfinder. And that's really the big difference. And like, for example, one of our players in one of the other adventures we did, she wanted to have our barbarian sorcerer. And she did. And it works out very well. In this adventure path, we have an investigator wizard. and it's working out very well. We have also John Statz is playing a rogue, but he punches people and uses them all. He's the most unrogue-like rogue, but he actually is a rogue because he also can disarm traps, but he doesn't. He never uses sneak attack. So that's the thing. It's like you can make almost anything you want in Pathfinder, and the nice thing about it is that you can have 10 fighters in Pathfinder and they'll all be different. Like there's no like, oh, everyone has the same type of fighter. And I'll say even Pathfinder First Edition, that wasn't this thing. Like everyone had like a flavor of fighter. Here everyone has something different. Everyone has a different type of monk. Everyone has a different type of wizard, sorcerer. No one is the same. Everyone is completely different. And then if you want to get started, the beginner's box. The beginner's box is fantastic. It comes with everything you need. It's cheap. It has a very good adventure that takes you from levels 1 to 3. And then there's a sequel adventure that will take you from level 3 to level 4. And that's more than enough. Like that is, it's like that is enough to last you, like months. And then you're up to level 4. And the other nice thing about the adventure beginner's box is that it's the real rules. And you feel like, okay, I don't have to have a pared down version of the rules. Like these are the rules. Now, as far as complexity, it's interesting. I'd say it's like chess. Like chess is very easy to learn the rules and it's very easy to play, but it's very hard to master and it could take a long time. I feel Pathfinder is kind of the same way. Like there are a lot of rules. I'm not going to lie. And if you get into the weeds, it can get nuts. But the thing is, you don't have to if you don't want to. If you want to play a light version of Pathfinder, you can. If you want to play heavy role playing, you can. Or if you want to play, almost Warhammer 40K type level of rule set, you can do that too. You can play anything. And our circus adventure path is heavy role playing, super duper heavy role playing. It's like probably half role playing and half, crunch. As opposed to Agents of Edgewatch, it's a lot of crunch. It's like these guys like to fight. They don't like to sit around and talk about their feelings. Like they just like to get right into it. But the thing is, this system handles both really, really well. And it's just, in my opinion, because it allows you to do everything, you don't have to sacrifice anything. Yeah. So I just think it's a superior system. Trust me, I play D&D, since Redbox. I've been playing it my whole life. It's just different. They're different systems at this point in time. That's all.
Are you enjoying second edition so far?
Oh yeah, second edition. I love it. I mean, it's probably the best edition I've ever seen by far for any role-playing game. And I mean, I can get into it. But the main reason is the math and the way the math is built. And I actually want to get into this on like my own show, but the way a lot of these systems are built is they're built for the floor, which means is like your characters can get very, very powerful. Like first edition of Pathfinder, like they built all the rules and the numbers for the least powerful. So unfortunately, you can get extremely powerful. Pathfinder second edition, they built for the ceiling, which in some ways people might not like because they're like, well, my characters can only get so powerful, which is true. But it allows the balance of the game to be perfect. It allows the balance of the game to really work extremely well because you can't really overpower your character. And where overpowering comes from, quite frankly, is tactics. At this point, it's a tactics game because it's kind of like a 40K game. It's like you can only make your characters so powerful. And the difference between the really good players and the really superb players are the tactics you use in combat or the way you play the game, not that you munchkins your player. So I don't know if I'm getting into too much detail, but
no. And I know there's a big debates going on out there on YouTube and on Twitter. And so we won't get into all that, but second edition to me too, as someone who never played first edition Pathfinder, the rule book itself seemed to me so easy to read and approachable and well designed as both a guide and a reference book. And so, and we're looking forward to taking a look at the beginner box here soon too. And I was hoping to tell us a little bit about what's going on at Roll for Combat and what you guys are up to these days.
There's a lot going on.
There's always a lot, I know.
There's always a lot. Well, I mean, so we have 2 podcasts. We have Three Ring Adventure, which is doing Extinction Curse. And we're up to the middle of book 2. And that one is really, if a lot of people listened to our, a lot of people listened to our adventure path or our adventure of
Plaguestone?
Oh, Plaguestone, right. I couldn't remember. The Fall of Plaguestone.
Yeah.
And that's probably our most popular one. And a lot of people liked our Fall of Plaguestone. That's by far our most popular adventure. And it's a lot of the same players. And because they liked it, it was very heavy character based. So right now, if you're listening to book 2 or season 2, it's starting to get pretty crazy. Like it's getting really into the meat and potatoes. And one of the problems with adventure paths is that they really don't tell you what's going on until the middle of book 2 or even book 3. So for those of you who've been listening to it, it's almost been a year now. They're like, this is really fun, but what's the main point of this? Well, you're about to finally find out what the main point is. It's just the way Paizo writes them. So it's starting to get like, but you know what? Most TV shows work this way too. If you think about it, like Mandalorian, even it's like first season was set up for the characters, and second season is where all the meat and potatoes and the action. Same thing. First season of Three Ring Adventure is setting up the characters in the world. Second season, meat and potatoes. So we're doing that. Agents of Edgewatch. But the other thing we're doing is we have the Roll for Combat RPG Superstar contest. So that is where we had people submit monsters, and we picked the 101 best monsters. And now we are putting together a hardcover book that's going to come out this summer. And it's all the monsters from all the winners. We're having actually Patrick Rennie from Paizo is editing them. He's like Mr. Monster. He loves monsters. So he's going through, he's giving it the official Paizo polish because there's a lot of unwritten rules when you make monsters. So I'm having someone professionally from Paizo, going through all the monsters to make sure that they're adjusted perfectly for Pathfinder. We have artwork for every single monster. So I didn't realize getting 200 pieces of artwork would be so much work, but wow, it's a lot of work. So that's pretty much a few hours of my day. Every day is going through artwork. But we're getting, like, the artists I'm getting are beyond top notch. And there's some other aspects to it. There's a secret section that right now Mark Steifer is working on, and Mark is in charge of a lot of the crunch at Paizo, and so he's working on a super duper secret section that when it comes out, everyone's going to be like, they're going to wonder why it wasn't in any. I can't believe it's not in anything yet. It's not in D&D. It's not in Pathfinder. And it's going to come out. I know people are wondering, like, what are you talking about? I promise you, it's going to come out and people are going to be like, damn it, why didn't we add this? I actually had to get approval from Paizo because they thought it was such a good idea they were going to take it. But thankfully they didn't. I got to use it instead. I know. They're like, that's too good of an idea. I'm like, please let me use my own idea on this book. and let me use a Paizo developer to develop it so it's as good as possible. So it took a while. They got approval. So basically I have myself and as many Paizo people as I can find to work on this book. And it'll be a 160-page book. It's like the same size as an Alien Archive. Right now we're looking at hardcover, full color, high quality. And there'll be both the physical book itself as well as a PDF. And again, I'm looking towards the summer. We're like 50% done with the book right now, and it's accelerating because now we're kind of getting into a rhythm. So what's it right now? It's February. So and Gen Con's August. So trying to hit Gen Con. Originally PaizoCon's in May. I don't know if we'll make May, but we should easily make August. That's mostly it.
Where can people pre-order it if they're interested?
There is no pre-order. That's a good idea. I should probably put up a pre-order page. I have no idea.
Well, I would put
everything.
Days.
I know. I never thought about that. I'm too involved in my own little world. Well, everything will be on rollforcombat.com. So I'll definitely put it up on rollforcombat.com, and that's a good idea. Actually, I'll look into that right now, into pre-ordering it. To be honest, because there's 101 authors, I've been spending a lot of time talking to them. And just talking to the actual authors and making sure, they get a chance to look at the monsters after they're updated. I send them the artwork. I even have them, give some feedback on the artwork. So I've been working with, so it's like, okay, not only, it's interesting when you're working with, you're working with 100 authors and like 200 pieces of artwork and multiple editors. I was like, wow, this is a lot of work. I thought it would be like real easy. Next time I'm going to do 10 winners. It'd be a lot simpler. It was like Eric Moan is the one who convinced me. It's like, make it really big, have like 100 monsters in it. I was like, okay, how hard can that be? All right, well, thanks, Eric. So
That's awesome.
Right now.
Now, is there any possibility of a new podcast coming up or anything?
We might. The thing is, we're not sure what we want to do. I know it's our Dead Suns adventure path is incredibly popular. That one is also, that was the first one we ever did, and people just love it. And the nice thing about it is that it's done.
Yeah.
So you can like listen to the whole thing from beginning to end. And it ended great too. It was one of these, it's very hard to end adventure paths, and it's very hard to end them. And I can't give out spoilers, but this one just really came out well. And the nice thing is that there's always, now I'm not giving out a spoiler. There's always a big fight. They always end with a big fight. And you always want these big fights to be epic. And it took us in real time 2 months to do the final fight. So, and it comes out on the podcast. So like when you listen to it, it's not just, oh, and they go and they beat the bad guy. It's like, no, it is like Avengers Endgame style takedown, huge payoff, big ending. Like that was a great one. So it's hard to think, what am I going to do since, after that? I'm not sure. I know a lot of people want us to do Starfinder. A lot of people have been begging us to do Starfinder again. If I did Starfinder, I would probably do maybe one of the smaller ones, like the 3 Adventure Path ones. But at the same time, there's like, it's so hard because there's the Ruby Phoenix tournament coming up.
Yeah.
And that is going to be,
though, right?
I know, but it's such a good,
it looks good.
That's like a thing that's been around in Pathfinder for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I always play monks, and in real life, I have several black belts, and like I do a lot of karate and kung fu. So I'm really into the martial arts world. So I'm like, oh man, how can I not play a Ruby Phoenix tournament? And it's literally Mortal Kombat. It's literally the Mortal Kombat tournament in Pathfinder, and it's only 3 books, and you start at level 12, so you don't even have to worry about like all the beginning levels where you're kind of soft and squishy. It's not out yet, and I don't even have the books yet. I get them early, so at least I can plan. But I haven't even seen them yet. So I don't know. It's hard. There's the problem is that I can only do so many podcasts, and I don't know how you manage to do so much content. It's like, I don't know how you do it. Like I go through every podcast with a fine tooth comb. We record it, and then I go through every inch of it and edit it. And 2 is my limit. We actually hired an editor, so it should make my life easier. That's why we're thinking of maybe doing a 3rd, because I can record 3 or 4 a week. That's not a problem. It's recording isn't the problem. It's editing and releasing them. That's the problem. And, it's hard to do it. It's hard to have someone else do it for you.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
I understand.
Like what would you want if you had your druthers?
As far as a live play Rule for Combat podcast?
Yeah.
Gosh, I was thinking about that. I do like the idea of the short ones because, and there's also a couple of short, like just one book adventures they put out too, right? Like there's Eric Mona.
Not for Starfinder. Yeah, actually, you just gave me the idea. Actually, that's a good idea. Starfinder just announced they're coming out with a 1 adventure book.
Oh, I didn't see that yet.
In a few months. That actually is probably a good one, because that way it's not a full adventure path, but it's good size, like Fall of Plaguestone. Fall of Plaguestone is by far our most popular, adventure, and I think it's a combination that it was long because it's something like 36 episodes, but not too long.
Mhm.
It's long enough that you get a full adventure, but you don't have to dedicate next 3 years of your life to it. So, and now I'm thinking about it, I think that's what that will be my official answer, is I think we'll do the adventure as long as it's decent.
Right.
I'll caveat that. It's because sometimes I get these adventures, not that Paizo puts out bad adventures, but sometimes they don't make good podcast material is
Yeah.
the best to say it. Some adventures are better for podcasts than others. So.
I just thought of one too, and I'll pitch it to you briefly, but I kind of want to do it myself now if I ever do something on Twitch. But Paizo does have a little series of Skittermander adventures that they've put out for Free RPG Day.
Yeah,
I think there's just 2 now, but that would just be like 5 episodes probably. It's just a real one shot. That would be fun. I'd like to see your players all play Skittermanders.
They'd be bad. Well, it depends which group. If the hardcore guys, if it's the Edgewatch guys, they'd not be good at Skittermanders. If it's the other group, they'd be good at Skittermanders.
Yeah.
Like the Edgewatch guys don't do voices. That's their rules. Like we don't do voices. The other group does voices. So I actually not only can do that, but I am very good friends with all the authors of those as well. So I probably can get the authors to run those for me, which would even be more fun. That's actually not a bad idea. If I get the author to run, and maybe I can even be a player, because I never play ever. Actually, I'm one of those GMs that I get really, really, really bored as a player. Like if I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I don't know how players do it. They're just sitting there waiting, patiently for 20 minutes before it's their turn to go. I'm like, if I'm not constantly talking or being in charge, like running stuff, I'm just bored out of my mind. But I'd try that. I'd try a Skittermander. That's not a bad idea.
It'd be a cute one. It's a one shot. I've kept you.
Yeah, those one shots are good.
I have kept you so long. I'm sorry. There's so much to talk about.
No, I can go on forever. There's no limit.
I'm sure you got things to do. I really appreciate you joining us today. And we were, so let's talk about Agents of Edgewatch. We ended up talking about everything. Any last final thoughts about Agents of Edgewatch, or any tips you want to give players who might be thinking about taking it up that you haven't talked about already?
Yeah, definitely check out our podcast again. Just go to rollforcombat.com, because one of the things I do on the podcast, and we're official Paizo partner, is that we give out a lot of rules and how they should be run. Mm-hmm. And what happens a lot in the show is that we'll make mistakes, and then the next week I'll explain and correct them. And so if I do something incorrectly, or if we do something incorrectly in the show, we'll explain it to you. A lot of people listen to the show to figure out how to run it themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a large majority of not a large majority, but a good portion of the people playing are the people listening that are GMs for their own podcasts. So if you want to, get some hints or tips or tricks, we go through a lot. We also explain the rules in the podcast. All of our players go through and explain why we're doing something. We don't just say, "Oh, I cast Fireball." Fireball we might, but like if we're doing a spell, and you'll hear me actually say, "So Vanessa, what does that spell do?" And that's not me. That's me trying to tell everyone, "Hey, let's explain to the audience how this works in case you want to use it yourself." So we do this, and we do this in Starfinder too. So we always are trying to explain to you how to run the game. So if you want to listen to our show, we sort of do that. We do a combination of playing the game and explaining the game. And then we do what's called raw, which is rules as written, which is we try to play the game as close as possible to the rules. And in fact, the times I don't play by the rules, I say why. I'll even say, what, we're not playing this by the rules, and I'll tell you why. Mm-hmm. And then we'll explain why. And then, it's your game. You can do whatever you want. So so it's both fun and educational. It's like what we like to say.
That's what I like to tell them too. Like just listening to people, especially people who have a lot of experience playing through these adventures, especially if you're new, you can kind of see what works for your style and what doesn't, what you would change, and you can kind of draw upon that experience from you all and take it and run with it and make the story their own.
Yeah, I mean that's something else. It's like anything else. It is funny. Is that you do it for so long, and things we used to just get into fights about or just have arguments about, like 20, 25 years ago, especially things can get really heated when you're playing with your character, and if a GM makes a mistake with the rules and then they accidentally kill a character and it literally is a mistake, things can get. I've seen some big fights, at conventions. I mean, it's amazing how big these fights can get. I've seen people lose friendships over these games. Like, it can get really heated, and I talk about that a lot. And I'm like, look, just calm down. As a GM, I always give hints before each podcast, like, try to keep it level. It's a game. These are your friends. You're not the enemy. You're not adversarial as the GM. You're just trying to tell a story. And, we try to always show how to do things another way, especially because if we've seen it a million times, like we have seen a lot of things that might trip up other GMs or make other GMs be put into bad situations. And I've seen that lots of times where it turns into, especially if you're GMing just 4 players or 5 players, it's 5 against 1. And it can get very adversarial very, very quickly. And I have tips on how to diffuse that. I have tips on how to make it that the players have agency over the game themselves so that they feel like they are part of the rules and you're not just, arbitrarily saying things. And even how to deal with life and death. Like, we've had that more than a few times in our game where people go down and I explain, like, okay, if we're gonna, like, someone's gonna die, like, this is what you do. Like, this is how you make sure that it's fair for everyone and that the players feel like it was fair. Because trust me, I literally have lost friends over character death. It sounds crazy, but it's happened. So
People invest a lot
it's
of themselves in their
I
characters.
know.
Yeah.
I know. They get really invested. It's storytelling. How invested can you get? It's like, yeah, I've seen, yeah. I mean, even just this week and this week's 3 Ring Adventure, Lauren, oh, it didn't come out yet. It comes out later this week. She is crying like a baby in this week's episode.
Oh.
So I'm like, I can't tell if I'm proud or sad for making her cry.
It's a little bit of both. Sure.
A little bit of both. It's like, yeah, wow, look, I really touched her. But she's so invested in her character.
That's what I like too about this game is just, and I know we're running long, but like
Yeah,
when
that's
you
right.
look back at your games 5 years in the future, you don't say, oh, Dougie did this in this adventure. You're just like, oh, you remember when we invaded that? We had that bank heist, and it's we did that, not these characters. It's us, and so there's all those memories you're making. Then they're your memories, and so yeah, it's just that's what's great about the game, but also can make it a little fragile sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's why also I like the podcast form, because I feel like this is the first time I've been doing this, my whole life, and we have all these. It's a shame too, because I tell about stories of like Iron Gods. Iron Gods was where, of all of our adventure paths, to my mind, that was probably one of the best ones we ever had. It was crazy. It was really just amazing stuff happened in that adventure path. But no one can experience it. There's only us. There's only 5 of us that have experienced that, and that we're the only 5 that ever will. And the nice thing about recording these is that we can share it, and it's like, okay, not only do I have them, so I can listen to them and hear what happened, but now finally other people can listen and hear these stories and these adventures, and it's fun to share them with other people, and they get to see and get invested with these characters and invested with the story. And that's the nicest thing. That's why I love the podcast format and listening to my show or anyone's or other people's shows. It's like you can get a glimpse into their games, and that's why I think it's so popular. It's like, who doesn't want to tell stories? Everyone loves telling stories, and now you can share these stories, which are already very intimate stories, with other people. Which is why if I go to Twitch and I'm like, let's see how many people are playing D&D, there's like 10,000 people, and some of these, most of these have like no one watching, or even 1 or 2 people, but they just want to be out there to have the possibility to share their stories with people. And I'm just lucky that we got into it early, and we have a pretty big audience and some very dedicated listeners, and people like yourself, help sponsor, and we help sponsor your show, and you help get the word out. So, but yeah,
And if folks are interested in
it's
listening,
a great hobby.
yeah, you can just look up Roll for Combat on whatever podcasting app you love to listen to, or you can find everything on rollforcombat.com. And of course, you'll have your Discord channel, and you have your book coming out. You're just keeping busy. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day here to talk to us today. And hopefully you'll come back and talk about more adventures in the future. We've got Kingmaker coming up that I'm looking forward to. I want to talk to you about that. Just loads of stuff. So I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Yes, I have to tell you all about our disastrous Kingmaker campaign one day.
I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
Ended in tears.
Oh, no. At least,
Oh no, it's a good story because everyone
Okay.
talks about how great it is. I have the other end of the spectrum of like, oh, what happens when your kingdom fails horribly? Well, I can tell you.
well, we will definitely have you back for that because I want to hear that story.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Glicker, Stephen, for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Theo.
Again, many thanks to Stephen for sitting down with us. The full Agents of Edgewatch adventure path is available now on Paizo.com or at your retailer of choice. You can subscribe to the Roll for Combat Actual Play podcast on your podcasting app of choice or over on rollforcombat.com. They're currently on book 2 of both Agents of Edgewatch and the Extinction Cursed Adventure Path in a show they call the 3-Ring Adventure. See more about the RPG Superstar contest at rpgsuperstar.com and use the link below to check out the Kickstarter. Also, be sure to check out the sale going on right now for the new sets of animated spell cards from Hit Point Press and the Deck of Many. These are so much fun to have during your 5e games. Not only are they helpful little repositories of spell knowledge with everything you need to know on the back of the cards, but they also just are beautiful to look at with 8 frames of lenticular animation for each spell. They make browsing your spell list and preparing your daily spells so much more fun. They're currently on sale during their pre-order period, so go check them out today at animatedspells.com. And thank you for watching today. Be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything. Lots of fun videos on the horizon for you. Hit the bell icon down there to be notified when we drop new videos. You can find our merch at gallantgoblin.com/shop. Come chat with us on Discord and see all the latest happenings on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. For now, stay safe, have fun, love each other, and I'll see you next time at the Gallant Goblin.